Hello again, and welcome to the Safe Kids, Sane Parents Family Safety Podcast. I'm Jason Brick, travel writer, and with me as always is Richard Hubbard. And a long delay. Excellent. We're having some technical issues today. Our apologies in advance. Richard, how's the lag right now?
It's all right. There's a few seconds, so we'll have to be mindful of it. Once again, apologies, everyone.
No worries. And if you hear some rumbling and crashing in the background, that's just some construction going on upstairs, so don't worry too much about that. So for this week, the topic is based on something I'm very excited about. As it turns out, my family and I are having a chance to travel to several parts of India starting about a week from now. And we thought this would be a great opportunity to talk about some travel safety ideas and some challenges of travel safety.
And I think that's great. It's one of the things that I think is often overlooked in training. And it's one of the things that's kind of difficult to train. And yet it's something that can be a lot of fun and can bring a family together in the process of learning about that and working together to stay situationally aware, to check their surroundings, to know where it is that they can find help and assistance. And it's something that I think brings the family unit together really well. And so I'm very envious of your experiences that you're having right now.
Well, it has been a lot of fun, and at this point, I'm also looking forward to getting back to the States, if only so we can have better internet for the podcast.
Sure,
Let's kind of jump right into it. Yeah, absolutely. But let's go ahead and jump into it. Some feedback I've gotten from some parents who I've spoken to about the trip is that many of them would like to travel in more interesting places, or I shouldn't even say interesting, but more exotic places than United States, Europe, Canada, and those places that are very safe and very sane. And as parents, they're a little worried about the safety concerns of bringing their kids to a less developed environment. And we want to talk today about some of the things that my wife and I have done with our kids specifically to hedge our bets on the safety standpoint. And I want to start with what I think is the biggest concern that a lot of people have, and that's just losing your child. Richard, you told a story on, I think, our first episode about losing your child in just a museum in America.
Sure. Yeah, it was at the Museum of Science in Boston. And during a very, very big, very packed exhibit, it was the bodies exhibit. And we, everything was okay. She was actually in the same exhibit. But it was so big and it was so filled that we couldn't find her. And we were just about at the point where we were the security couldn't find her either, and they were about to shut the place down, and then we finally found her, but she wasn't even aware that we were looking for her, and yet she was actually very near us during that whole time too. So going to a completely different country, in a less developed part of the world where the language differences especially are so different. There's such a difference from, Hindi as a language that, if you're going to many of the places in Europe, there's at least somewhat of an understanding of the nature of the languages being similar enough that you can oftentimes make yourself understood. When you go that far away from home, oftentimes there are such cultural and linguistic differences that it's going to be much, much harder to make yourself understood if you're with somebody with whom you don't share a common language.
Yeah. And the thing about that story that kind of resonates with this conversation, your story about the museum, is that you lost your daughter in a place that had uniformed, identifiable security guards who, as you say, spoke your language and who had a system in place for finding children. They had a code that they used, and that whole environment had its thing. And then you go out in the world where, as you say, the language might be different. English is spoken fairly consistently in India, but between accents and degree, it's often very difficult for an American to communicate with people in many regions of India. But they don't have a system in place. The communications can be strange. And, of course, if I were to lose track of my child, I can't guarantee that I would be anything but freaking out. So one of the tools that came to my attention, this certainly isn't a Jason Brick original, but I spread the word as much as possible, is that every morning when you're about to leave the hotel, you take a picture in the lobby of your child, head to toe or head to knees shot, basically, of your kid, so that in the event that you lose track of them, when you need to talk to a police officer, you don't have to try to remember what T-shirt they were wearing and then how to describe that in the language. You can text that officer a photo of what your child is wearing that day. And then he can have that to every other police officer who has a cell phone in the country in less time than it would take you to remember how to say camiseta if you were in Mexico City. I've never had to use this, but it is probably one of the most valuable tools I've ever run across in terms of travel safety with kids.
I remember my wife telling a story about when she went to, she was going off to college, and for some reason there was a flight problem or something, but her father elected to put her in a cab and send her on a 3-hour cab ride to where she needed to get. And so when she was leaving, he had her stand behind the cab with the cabbie, and he took a picture of both of them and the license plate of the cab before they drove away. And this was just kind of one of those things where, you know what, that's a great piece of advice. The first place I remember hearing of that piece of advice was actually when my wife told me that story when we first met.
Okay. Excellent. So yeah, that's one of the better ones. I don't even remember who I heard it from. Another piece on the loss, and this is a tool that we had a conversation on Facebook a while back, and I'd like to kind of revisit that. This here is a little hanging document wallet, normally used for your passport. It's got a little zipper here. This is REI brand, but it doesn't really matter. And it's sized for an adult, but I find that I can put it over my 5-year-old like this. And it's got a little bit of spending money for him. That's where he keeps his little bit of allowance if he sees something out of market. But more importantly, I don't know if the video resolution will be there, but this card says, my name is Gabriel. His name's Gabriel. My mommy is Beverly. And right now it's got our phone number here, but when we get our SIM cards in India, it'll be our SIM card number in India. My daddy's name is Jason and phone number. My brother's name is DJ and phone number. So that if Gabriel were to get separated from us, he could find a stranger that looks helpful, and we'll get to that in a moment, and then just show them the card. And that way, whoever finds him, whether it's an employee at the attraction we're at or somebody just on the street who spotted a lost child and wants to help, can reach us immediately. So that's
such a great idea. We usually, if we're going to a place where, we go to New York City, we go to Boston, we go someplace where that might be an issue here, we usually write our contact information on their hand. We take a little marker and we just write it on their hand with their name, our names, and phone number. And, the girls are old enough now that we don't really have to do that. But, a couple times we've been into New York City lately, and probably, next time we go there, we'll still do that. But that's a great way to do that. It's a really excellent idea.
There's a company, I just saw this, I think it maybe was advertised on a Facebook ad or something, that you can get a temporary henna tattoo stamp.
Okay.
Phone number. That's basically the idea you're doing, only slightly upgraded and a little fun.
Sure.
Now, there's a question I have for you on this, because I've gotten almost exactly 50-50 mixed reviews on the name. Back in the 80s, when the stranger danger epidemic hit, and there's a lot of news about it, a lot of people came out saying that personalized clothing, name on the exterior of the backpack, name on the T-shirt, or whatever, were a bad idea, because then a potential predator could use that to put the child at ease. I've also heard the argument that, honestly, a predator doesn't need a kid's name to find a way to put him at ease, so it doesn't necessarily do any harm.
Sure.
What have you read, heard, and thought about that? Because I've got about 50-50 on my own research.
Yeah, I'm, honestly, I don't really necessarily know. It's not something that I've done extensive research on. I would say that my general, my intuitive response to that is the latter. that if someone is really going to stalk your child, it's more likely than not that they're going to know them anyway, right? And if they are just a stranger who is going to abduct them, they really, the child knows that they don't know them, right? Regardless of whether or not they're using their name. And if they're going to go to that extent, they're not going to be deterred by, something. I mean, they've got all sorts of other ways that they can go about doing that. So I don't think that's not a factor, at least in how I think about it, that I would really see as relevant.
And that's the counter argument. And my guess is that it doesn't do any harm, but it doesn't do any particular good. So a family should judge based on the child's personality whether they think that being called by their personal name by somebody who found them would help them feel more comfortable and safer in the situation or not, rather than being a hard and fast rule. Like you said last time, always and never will get you killed.
Yeah.
And so the other piece on getting lost that I want to talk about is, and you know this one by heart too, this was from the gift, not the Gift of Fear, but rather De Becker's follow-up book, Protecting the Gift, about training our kids to go get help if they get separated. If you're lost, you want to stay put. You want to basically stay put because your parents will eventually come back there. That's true if you're lost in the woods, or if you're lost in a mall, or if you're lost in Delhi. But if a child waits and doesn't, then the person who approaches that child, although even that person is astronomically unlikely to mean the child harm, but the person who approaches the child is more likely to mean the child harm than a person the child approaches.
Yes.
And Gavin De Becker has the best piece of advice I've ever read about who your child should approach. And do you remember that one offhand?
It's moms with kids.
Bingo.
And yeah, I mean, that's always been, long before my mother taught that to me when I was a kid. If you're ever separated and you need help, the first thing you look for is a mom with kids.
Yeah.
And her often her advice was also, this was something that I think is very useful, particularly if you're traveling in a foreign country, that you teach your children how to differentiate between a police officer or a law enforcement professional and someone who may just be security or may just be wearing some type of uniform.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's kind of something that I think it's overlooked a lot, that is also really important.
Yes.
Particularly since you do have some statistics about many predatorial types using security or authority positions in order to mask or disguise their behavior or give themselves easier access to victims and information. Yeah. So moms with kids, and then how to actually identify the difference between a police officer, law enforcement professional, and somebody who's not.
And that, of course, gets exponentially more difficult when you leave the country that your kid grew up in. Because there's a whole other set of uniform conventions, in many cases, a whole other kind of body language.
And that's something I wanted to ask you about, because as you're going to India and as you've been through, Indonesia and many countries in the last year, what has been your experience in terms of when you change an environment, you come into a new environment, how do you do the research, and what have you found to go, okay, this is what the police uniforms look like here, and these uniforms might be similar to this other uniform, and do the police officers in this country carry weapons? Do they have a particular type of marking that they use on their vehicle? What is the word in that particular language that they can read as police or emergency services or medical or any of these things? So what has your experience been over the course of the last year or so?
In terms of research, I know it's very popular to hate on the leading brand and whatever it is, but Lonely Planet has really great comprehensive advice about that. They have, their writers are people who've lived in the area generally. Most of them many of them, I won't say most of them, but many of them are travelers in their 20s who aren't necessarily going to be on the right side of the law every time. They take a few more risks. They spend more time with a few more criminals. Yeah. And so they have some on-the-ground knowledge. So Lonely Planet is a great place to start. Going to the actual web pages of the police, because most countries, any country that the police don't have at least a rudimentary website, is probably a country a Westerner shouldn't be going on unless they're part of an organized mission or something like that.
Sure.
And those will have photos of the uniforms, pictures of the police cars. And then the other thing that you really want to look at, and we talked about this briefly in another episode, is get on the message boards, on the chat rooms for travel to that country or just in that country, and find out what the corruption situation is with the police.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to name any specific countries right now, but in some countries the police expect bribes. In some countries the police are largely just the biggest and best funded gang in the country.
Sure.
In many places in Southeast Asia, for example, the police and the military, the difference is mostly academic if it exists at all. And so that's and what I've noticed very specifically is, depending on what country you're in, the body language of the police change. Where if an officer approached you in America with this set of body language, you would be thinking, oh crap, I need my cell phone now because this guy is ready to engage in an inappropriate way, where it's just how police walk here. And it's been very interesting. But yeah, knowing and understanding about police, that's something you should check out. As a parent, I interact with police very, very, very rarely, so it's not as important for me as a family traveler as it might be for young people in their 20s or old people in their 50s who are traveling on their own. But that's a very good point you bring up, and those are the resources I would recommend for it.
Excellent. That's awesome. Now, what about phone? This has been something else I've been wondering about. Is, every country has its country code. You've got to switch your SIMs. You've got plans that work in some countries that don't work in others. You've got all of these different things. How do you deal with the whole issue of the cell phone, the changing of the numbers, maybe practicing having your kids dial numbers, or knowing what and how they can reach and what the numbers change to when you go to a new country? Like, how do you deal with that as a logistical consideration? So
the first thing you really do is you make that part of your plan. Just like, your agenda for the day includes this much time to get through customs, includes figuring out where the taxi is. Most international airports out here have kiosks on your way out where you can get a reasonably priced SIM card that will do the trick for your phone for the time there. Often they sell it in a week, a week's worth of SIM with an amount of minutes that you're just not going to use. And yeah, they're gouging you a little bit because they'll say you're there for 3 days, you have to buy a 7-day SIM card with 1,000 minutes, but it's still so much less than you pay for a burner in the States. It's not that big a deal.
Gotcha.
And then you just make sure that your phone's not locked by your current carrier. Because if it is, then the SIM's not going to work, and you need to go buy yourself a burner. But burners are cheap everywhere. And then the best thing for kids is just once you get to the hotel, you sit down, you got a little time, you pull everything out, you experiment as much as you need. You might need to go down to the concierge because that guy knows how to dial in your country, country. And put all 3 cell phones in the speed dial of all the cell phones. I said 3 because we have 3 people who use cell phones in our family, but if you're Catholic or Mormon and have 11 kids, then all 11 cell phones. But put that in there, practice, make sure everybody knows how, and then go on with your day and use those calls, make those calls if you need to.
Sure. That's excellent. That's really good practical stuff. Another question. What about access to emergency medical services, and how it is that if you need immediate attention or you need emergency attention, how do you find that, and what can you expect to be available or not available, and how do you deal with that?
Well, the first thing you want to do on that is go online and just do a Google search for what is 911 in country. What is 911 in India? What is 911 in Malaysia? Because sometimes it's 911, sometimes it's 119, sometimes it's 999. There's about 8 3-number combinations that are pretty common. And then there are some where they don't even have the concept of 911. Right. But you make sure you know it, and you make sure it's in the phone, because when you're freaking out because your kid just got run over by a yak or whatever, you might not remember which one it is.
Right.
So you make sure it's in the phone ready to go. And then some research ahead of time, and often the State Department has good resources for this. Australia's Tourism Services Department has good resources for this that will tell you very specifically what kind of medical care is available. And there's two aspects on that, right? If you're going to go into the wilds of Borneo, expect that you're not going to be able to get immediately to a hospital if something goes very, very badly. And you just have to know and understand that and make that part of your travel planning. I'm not an EMT, but I'm reasonably experienced with emergency medicine for a layman. And when we did our Borneo tour, the company that went with us had a medic as part of the team. So you need to just kind of accept that the situation on the ground is what it is and make your travel planning based on the margin for error you're willing to deal with. The other thing that you can do if you're going into a country that has less advanced medical care for whatever reason, you can get travel insurance that includes medevac to a major medical center. For example, the two best hospitals in Southeast Asia are in Singapore and Bangkok. So when I was traveling in Indonesia, we got a very inexpensive travel insurance policy that included air medevac to Singapore, which was the closest of those two cities to where we were going to be.
Excellent.
It went really, really badly. We were on a helicopter or on a jet, bright, shiny Western hospital with x-rays and machines that go ping.
Right.
And like all insurance, you hope you never use it, but that's one that I definitely recommend if you're traveling with a family. And it's a resource that not everybody's aware of.
That's interesting that you say that because you know, it's not something that I normally think about. I don't think it's something that many people wouldn't necessarily think about. Although it's something when I had herniated the disc in my neck a couple of years ago, we actually traveled to Bermuda, and I was still in a considerable amount of pain, although I was, you know, okay to travel. But one of the things we did was contact the insurance company and say, hey, where's the nearest medical center, and will you cover, you know, me being transported out there? And in this instance, there was an optional coverage that we could buy.
Yeah.
And I don't think we ended up doing it because I think it was kind of cost prohibitive, and I was well enough that you know, we didn't think there was going to be an issue. But now that you bring it up, it was something that had come up prior. So that's a really good piece of advice.
Yes, again, none of what I'm saying, well, almost none is a Jason Brick original. That's what really smart people told me. And I'm doing that because they were really smart.
You know what? But that's really all that we do as human beings, right? We learn from other people and from our own experience, and then we try to share that information as best we can. And if we can, you know, take a little chunk of place and time and space that we can store that all in an easy to access format, then hopefully we've done something right.
Hopefully. But that is one. Medical care is something that people don't think about as much because of and because we're so used to in the Western world having very immediate access to good care.
Yep.
And that kind of transitions into the next piece, and this is one thing that I really want to kind of dig into on the cast, because much like we talked earlier, that family safety isn't just keeping your kids safe from predators. It's not just knowing how to stop a mugging or how to avoid a mugging. It's not just about home invasion robberies and all that stuff. It's about eating right. It's about staying healthy. It's about fire safety. It's about making sure your kids know how to swim. And there's two big issues about travel in India specifically. And the first one of those is food safety and how to make sure that you don't end up, and like we all risked in 5th grade, dying of dysentery on the Oregon Trail, right?
Sure.
There's foodborne illnesses, including hepatitis C, which can, in extreme cases, mean a liver transplant and death, are things that can happen if you're not safe with food in areas that don't have developed sanitation. Now, you've done a fair amount of traveling your own self. So what are some things that you've experienced or done or heard that helped you stay safe?
You know, one of the things, food safety, a big thing, and really a lot of the advice that that you gave last podcast, or I think the podcast prior to that, about make sure that anything you put in your mouth has come prepackaged and that you have been the one who opened it. Or make sure that it's a whole food that you can peel or, denude of its outer casing yourself. Real simple, solid information. Bottled water, there's plenty of places that I've been where you just can't drink the water. This is something else that I found, because we typically, when we travel, we're in pretty civilized places, but I grew up out west. I grew up in Arizona, and I grew up with the reality being that there were venomous snakes, venomous spiders, scorpions, Gila monsters, insects, things that, if you come into contact with them, they can kill you. And one of the things that I had to do there when I was growing up that I didn't have to do when I moved to the Northeast, that kind of took a little while to get used to, and that I definitely like much better, was there was a basic protocol to doing simple things like putting your clothes on or putting your shoes on, or going into a room that you've never been in before, or examining whether or not a place was safe, that had to do with determining whether or not there was anything venomous in there that would bite you. So you would, for instance, when you come out to put your shoes on in the morning, you have to turn your shoes over and tap them out before you put them on. Because there would always be a chance that a little scorpion or a spider or something would go in there. You would have to make sure, like poke with a little stick into the dryer before you pull the clothes out, because there would be things that would crawl up the vent and come into a nice warm dryer and might be sitting in there when you go to take your clothes out. Things like that. And I remember once we were in, I can't remember where we were, but it was somewhere in the the Caribbean. And I had been swimming, and I had taken off my trunks, and I had hung them up to dry just on the railing of the house that we were staying at. And I came back later to put them back on, and I didn't check them first. I didn't shake them out. I just put them on. And there was probably a 6 to 8 inch millipede, or like giant centipede, that was inside of that. And I felt it moving, and I kind of freaked out, and it was crawled down my leg, and I smashed it, and it's ooky and creepy, and I doing the little girl dance and screaming and yelling. It was really nasty, but my leg swelled up. Pretty considerably, and it was tender, and it was uncomfortable for a couple days, because they have little venom sacs in their legs, and so as it crawled down my leg, it was but that's something that could have been very easily avoided had I just taken a very simple safety precaution, and potentially could have been, if it had become infected, could have been nastier, or had it been something nastier than this particular centipede, could have even been, much more serious than that. Really silly thing. And I kicked myself afterwards, because I was like, I spent most of my life growing up in a situation where that was just the protocol, and then, that situation. So taking account for native fauna and your interaction with what they may be. I know probably in Indonesia and Thailand, there's lots of big bugs and things, types of, particularly sometimes flies that will try to lay their eggs in human skin, sometimes mango worms, things like that. What have you had any experience with stuff like that over your travels?
I got dengue in December, because the dengue flies, if you leave your glass of water out, the dengue flies will lay eggs in your water. And that was nasty. It was a very mild case as dengue goes. I was only out for a week, but there's that. We haven't had any close encounters with scary big critters. We've seen some monitor lizards, and of course they've got such nasty bacteria in their mouth that for years people thought they were venomous. And they're just wandering around by the road. We've been on a few jungle treks and things where we saw venomous snakes and spiders and scorpions, but we had good guides who kept us safe.
Yeah.
One of the things, we were on a riverboat in Borneo where I asked if I could go swimming on a hot day when we were parked for a while, and said no. I asked why, and he shows me the crocodile.
Mm.
You know, and you just have to. You know, I haven't been here long enough to build the reflexes that you're talking about that you did growing up in the Southwest, but definitely just being aware of, very much like social danger, very much like paying attention to potential human predators.
Mm.
When you're in an area that you don't know the rules, that you don't know the signs, that you don't know the local wildlife, pay attention. Pay attention to the people who do know, and to the best of your ability, structure your time there so that you are in safer areas with people who know how to help you stay safe.
Yeah, that's great advice. Well, it reminds me, I'd gone to South Carolina with my father-in-law with our two small children. I think Skylar was probably 1 and Marlon was 4. And we were staying in a nice place. It was a good resort, but there were alligators everywhere, everywhere. I mean, and they were, we were on the golf course. They were on the golf course. There was a point where I hit a ball into some rough, and I went to walk into the rough to get the ball, and I just saw a couple of bands of snakes sort of like slither through the underbrush, and I don't know if it was a king or a copperhead, right? I didn't have time to really, but I said, you know what? I'll take a drop on that one, and I'm not gonna go and risk going in there to get the ball. But there were a couple instances where I had the girls with me. They're very small, and I'm carrying one, and they've got the other one by the hand, and we'd be walking along a path, and we'd come around a corner, and there would be an alligator just lying across the path. Mm-hmm. We'd have to make a choice of like, were we going to try to go by it and not disturb it, or are we going to go around? And I always made the choice to turn around and retrace our steps and go find another way. But as we were going through a tour of one of the little of one of the estuary areas, the tour guides made a very big point of saying, don't let your children go near down by the river, because it's not unheard of for small children to go down there, and next thing you know, they're gone. And it's not common, but it does happen occasionally. And so please keep your children attended to at all times. And, that's something, it's not a human predator, but but very dangerous.
Yeah,
so
still a predator.
Right.
Yeah. And you made a point there that I think is very important for, I'm going to sound a little sexist now and say men, because men are often dumber than women. But you and I both were adventurous in our 20s, and a lot of parents who want to go through the enormous amount of logistical and financial pain in the butt that is traveling with kids are people who love travel and love adventure. And in your 20s, when you were out by the alligators, you might have jumped over that alligator just on principle. But with your kids, yeah. Right? He's like, I resemble that remark.
Uh-huh.
Where you might even, that bar's a dangerous bar to drink in. That's a reason to go drink in that bar. We've had those thoughts. But as a parent with your kids, you saw that alligator, and your response was, I'll go around. And that's one of those big mental shifts that parents should take when they travel with their kids. That this activity that you would have loved if you were on your own or it was just you two parents, maybe that activity doesn't have to happen. Or, and this is getting back to situational awareness, if we've decided we're going to go see this ruin, it can be easy to get this kind of goal-oriented tunnel vision about, well, we're going to go to Angkor Wat. We're going now. There's a leopard in the way. That doesn't matter. Angkor Wat's on the other side of that leopard. We're going.
Yep.
And you don't pay enough attention to cues that could have kept you safe until all of a sudden those cues become situations. And so parents are accustomed to just kind of broadening their margin for error in general in life. It's just part of how we live. And broadening it even further when you go out into a foreign country, I think, is a very good idea. You had also brought up about the habits that you had formed about being careful with critters in the Southwest, and about the one time you let your guard down. I have to say that sentence about I put my shorts on and in my shorts was a 7 or 8 inch millipede is a really good ending for that sentence. It's one of the best possible endings for that sentence. Scorpion, spider, rattlesnake were all other candidates. And so that was a very lucky outcome, even though you did have some medical issues. Beverly and I were in China, and by that time we were both experienced travelers. We knew about water discipline. But she brushed her teeth with tap water and was ill for the first week of our vacation.
Mm.
So being very careful and vigilant, and remembering that it's not just of course you're not going to drink water out of the river where there's 17 kids over here and 2 people doing their laundry over there and a guy peeing there and 2 monkeys pooping over there. No, you're not going to drink out of that water. But you're also not going to have ice with your soda. Mm-hmm. Because you don't know what the quality of that water is. You're not going to take fruit from a vendor that's been opened, but you're going to buy, like you said, the whole fruit with the peel intact. Another little corner like that is about food. You don't have to have everything be pre-packaged microwavable, but if you order food from a vendor, make sure it is so hot that it almost hurts to take it, because everything's going to be dead in there. All the bacteria. And then the other one on that is, and I'm pretty sure I mentioned this in a previous podcast, eat at the busy places.
Yes.
Eat where the locals eat. Because they know which cart's going to give you a bad disease and which isn't. Now, those guys have different gut flora from us. So there's a reasonable chance that you'll still get a little bit of deli belly or a little bit of traveler's diarrhea. But those are unpleasant, but they're not serious medical problems. Where that one place that even the locals are avoiding because it's kind of nasty and sketchy, that's where you're going to get Giardia or amoebas or hepatitis C or some other really nasty strain of something.
Sure.
And so, yeah, eat where the locals eat, do what the locals do. If the locals tell you not to go to that river because there's alligators, don't send your kid down to the river.
Yeah.
Right.
And something else too that actually has come up several times, but came up when we were in Rome, when we were in Italy, too, is knowing where you can safely get money.
Yes.
Knowing how to find an ATM, knowing how to exchange money properly, knowing what the exchange rate is, knowing what the currency looks like, knowing where how to identify places that are legitimate and safe to get money or exchange money, and places that you don't necessarily want to go about doing that is another thing that I think is really important.
Yeah, cash handling skills. An exchange is very, very odd these days. I actually have a bank account that refunds all of my ATM fees, regardless of where I do it. And has very reasonable, it has exchange rates pegged to the national or the international markets, so they don't gouge me.
Yeah.
So I don't go to an exchange just because why, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of money safety, the airport's a very good spot. Most airports have an exchange counter where you're waiting for your luggage. And here's the advantages of those. Number one is, unlike almost everything else at the airport, they're not going to bend you over on prices. They're usually national banks that aren't going to be extensively more expensive than going elsewhere. Certainly not something that somebody who's not local is going to find. And the other thing, and this is from more to the point that you were talking about, it's on the other side of the finals customs check. Your casual predator and even your professional predator who's going to start scoping people out are going to start scoping you after you've walked through the security door. Unless you're in a place where the law enforcement is itself corrupt and looking for victims,
sure,
nobody's looking for the gringo with the cash in that environment. And that's not true of pretty much anywhere else you can get cash in that country.
It's a good point.
And so that's where, if you're going to do the exchange thing, or hit an ATM, because there's often an ATM in that environment too, that's a good place to do your first big hit to get the foreign currency, unless, of course, you'll pay a little extra, but just do it in your home country before you leave. One thing, and let me see if I have it on me right now, is dealing with your currency. One thing that's true in America, we don't deal with currency anymore. We use plastic almost all the time. It actually took me about a month to stop accidentally trying to buy things when I didn't have enough money on me, because they don't use cards out here. Is you take your money right? And what I usually do is I'll take the large bit, the large wad, and what I'm not keeping in a safe in the hotel, I put into two groups of money, and I put them into some of my deeper pockets. And I don't access those in public. I have another roll that is for the stuff that I think I'm going to use in the next 4 or 5 hours, and that's calibrated to what I know things are going to cost that day, how much it costs to get into the museum, whether or not we're going to go to a market, how much dinner is going to cost, and everything like that. And that one stays in my front pocket, and you put it in a stack with the largest bills on the bottom, smallest bills in the back, and you fold it so that the small bills are what's visible on the outside. Actually, small bills are what's visible on the outside, and then when you need to buy, you can just go through the small bills. You're not flashing a large wad. It's easy to go through. It's easy to count. And then if things get disarrayed, which they always do, the best place to reassess your money or access those other reserves of money, whether they're in a money belt or whether they're in a deep pocket in your cargo pants or your sock or whatever, is go to the restroom. Go to the restroom, sit down in the stall. If you're in an area that has toilets you can sit down on, if not, just lean against the wall, in a stall. And then reassess and rejigger your money and move things around. Never ever do that out in the world.
It's a great point.
And you've had some experiences in Europe, which is apparently a pickpocketing nightmare. Actually, it depends on whether you're the pickpocket or the pickpocketee.
Right.
A nightmare for some, paradise for others. What have been some of your experiences there?
I think over the course of my experience, I've become fairly good at scanning crowds and noticing patterns of behavior in order to pick potential problems out of environments. Mm-hmm. When we were in Italy, when we were in Rome in particular, there were a lot of people who would approach you asking you to buy things, kids. There was, and I identified in several of the sort of places where we were, who the people were who were looking for marks. Mm-hmm. And I don't know exactly what type of marks they were looking for, but I know they were looking for marks. And in every instance where we came into that sort of a situation where I'm scanning the crowd, I'm looking at the way people are acting, and I'm keying into who the people are who are hunting. Mm-hmm. That if ever their attention came on to me, non-confrontationally, but I would just make absolute eye contact and let them know that I knew that they were looking at me. Yeah. And always there would, they'd acknowledge me and then they would move on. Mm. And, I don't know, what they ended up doing, obviously, but I came into that situation saying, I'm not going to be aggressive. I'm not going to be confrontational. I'm not going to do anything other than have my head on a swivel and meet your eyes to let you know that it's not going to be me.
Yeah. Just that little exchange of, hey, that's all it takes. And you don't know whether for sure that guy was being a predator, but you do know that if he's up to no good, he's going to find somebody else.
Sure.
One of the particular scams that was brought to my attention in Ciudad Juarez was people would give advice to look out for pickpockets. And in some cases, in the really ham-fisted scams, you'd have a little kid just yell it. And other times you might have a shopkeeper who's in on it mention, hey, be careful of pickpockets in this area. And if you hear watch out for pickpockets, what's the first thing your hand does?
Goes down to your wallet.
Yeah, and so now the pickpockets know where your wallet is.
Right. It's a great.
And so if you can stop yourself, and I find that I do that. I telegraph that all the time, even accidentally. Transitioning from one space to another, I'll just quick check my pockets. Okay, my wallet's still there, my passport's still there, my phone's still there. Anything else I accidentally left behind is non-essential. But I've also just told anybody who's watching carefully where my valuables are.
Yep.
And so be aware of those cues. You're talking about things that we can look for to identify potential predators. We're giving off all kinds of potential victim cues. And the degree to which we can minimize those, or to use the bathroom thing again, anytime I catch myself doing that, I'll go to the bathroom real quick and then move things. So that if we give off intel, at least we can make that intel incorrect.
Sure.
So, An environmental factor, another one in this particular case, is specific to India, Southeast Asia, and in other environments it's different things, and it's related to the flora and fauna issue as well. And that's heat and sun. You know, we're going to be in India in June. It's going to be really, really hot, and the sun's going to be really, really aggressive.
Yeah.
And
it's
things like
humid too.
Yeah. And so heat exhaustion, heat stroke are worries and happen to travelers more often than you think. Sunburn is a huge worry, especially, you know, my youngest is so pale you can pretty much see his internal organs. And so, you know, you gotta, having sunblock to apply, having an extra little tube somewhere on your person so that you can re-up your nose and your ears, and wearing a good size hat, and keeping in mind, you know, just knowing the ways to regulate your heat. And one of the better resources I've found for that is actually military survival manuals. There's a couple online right now that appear, as far as I can tell, to be verbatim transcriptions of U.S. military environmental and wilderness survival guide training manuals just to a website blog format. And they'll tell you the signs of heat stroke, ways to regulate your temperature, you know, little things like if you're in direct sunlight, wear a hat. If you're not in direct sunlight, take your hat off so you can vent. Little things like that. And but heat and sun safety are very, very important if you're going to travel in Southeast Asia, South America. Yeah. And the opposite is true if you're going to go trekking in Alaska.
I imagine you have to stay hydrated too. It's becoming dehydrated is something that and not just a lot of times what we'll do is we will start that process of getting dehydrated, or you'll spend an extended period of time in a warmer environment where you're perspiring a lot, and you'll be drinking a ton of water, but you won't be replacing your electrolytes fast enough. And so I've actually had situations where, you know, a person has stopped sweating. And you kind of go, well, wait a minute, you should be sweating. You're not sweating. And they'd be like, oh, you know, I'm actually kind of feel cold. And it's like, you know what, that's a very, very bad sign.
Yes.
So, you know, it's easy to fall into the trap of I'm drinking a ton of water, but I'm starting to really not feel good. Well, you need some salt, you know, quickly. So that's another thing.
Now, in Southeast Asia and India, apparently, your friend is 7-Eleven. There are more 7-Elevens in Bangkok than there are in North America.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so everybody's got Gatorade. Everybody's got Gatorade.
Yep.
You know, and what I find useful is I get a Gatorade and a bottle of water, and then just about half cut the Gatorade with it, whether I do it by taking a sip and a sip or I shake it back and forth. Really depends on what the kids are feeling on that day.
Sure.
But that's plenty to get those electrolytes and salts back in you. And also because most 7-Elevens are air conditioned, you can do a little bit of temperature regulation while you're in there.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you have these little oases that you you can jump to.
Exactly. And the farther afield you go, of course, access to cold water, good water, drinkable water becomes an issue with hydration. And this is one of those places where Tom Callis will probably smack me when he hears this. But when you are traveling in a less developed area, you just need to get over our environmentally responsible aversion to bottled water. Just accept that you're going to generate 3 or 4 empty bottles a day. Figure some way to balance your environmental karma on it, but this is something that's going to happen if you want to stay healthy, so just be ready for it.
Yep. It's just a casualty of the experience.
Exactly, because you don't want to risk your health or your kids' health over that thing in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So those are all the things that I kind of had off the top of my head. Are there anything that you've worried about, thought about, or anything you want to say? Hey, Jason, that's the dumbest thing I've heard all week.
You know, not really this week at all. It was nice because as you gave some of your experiences, it actually made me think about some of these stories that I mentioned today. I really haven't thought about them in years until this conversation sparks the memory, and then I say, oh yeah, there was that instance of when, you know, that happened. So it was really nice to have this because it's actually reminded me of some of the things that I've sort of forgotten over the years, or that I think it's good to have a refresher on, a good reminder of.
And also just a reminder of the good times. The thing is that travel, especially travel to exotic places, is good for you. And it's enjoyable, and it's fun, and it grows you as a person. And that's why we're living out here with our kids for a year, so that our kids can have that experience. And I think a lot of parents kind of take that kind of experience off the table when they have children because they're worried about safety. And anything we can do to kind of encourage people to, if you make these decisions, it's not unsafe. I think that's a good thing for families. And you can get payoffs like, I think we'll kind of end with this story about my youngest. We're going through customs on this adventure. My parents came out to visit for a month, and we took them to Thailand and Borneo and Jakarta and Sumatra and Singapore and all this. And of course, Gabriel's lived here for 6 months now. He understands about saying hello and thank you in Bahasa Malay and in Thai and in Vietnamese and in Indonesian and in several other languages. We're at the customs station going into a part of Indonesia, and he says, "Daddy, I don't know how to say thank you in this language." And for me, a 5-year-old, understanding the power of knowing how to say thank you in somebody's preferred language, and B, understanding the linguistic environment and what customs is enough that he would think to ask how to do that. Mm-hmm. That was a huge payoff for me that affirmed why we're out here doing this.
Well, and that was something that I was actually going to mention too. Is like you said, travel is about all of these great things that it does for you, and having all of these amazing experiences that grow you as a person. The practice of understanding that you need to be mindful, and you need to be diligent, and you need to be disciplined and regimented about how you think about and approach your daily living in a way that we get lazy about when we're at home because we're comfortable and we know the environment so well. But being put in a place where you have to be mindful, you have to be diligent, you have to be disciplined, it's good for your brain, it's good for your body, it's good for you, period.
Yeah, exactly. And this is a family safety podcast, and so it's good for your family. It's good to show that example. It's good to model that behavior. And it's good for your children to have the experiences that will become available to them because you've adopted that mindset and that practice. So we're about at an hour, so why don't we close out as we always do?
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. You can follow Jason at brick.jason.com. Is that correct?
Yep.
That's his blog. You can find me at prevailmartialarts.com. And everyone, thank you for joining us. Always remember, you are stronger than you think you are.